Hello everybody, I'm Martin Thibeault and I'm sitting here with Pat Zalewski in his home in Cairns, Australia. It's November 2022 and this is part of a series of video casts of interviews that we're having on Pat's background, how he came to know the Golden Dawn, and this particular one's going to have a focus on the Whare Ra Temple in Havelock North in New Zealand. So, Pat, let's do a bit of a recap. In a previous talk that we had, you described a little bit of how you first heard about John Van Dadelson and got in touch with him, sent a letter, and then how did it go from there? How did you join up in touch with Jack Taylor and then finding yourself going up north to visit the temple at Havelock North?
Well, we'll start, I think we've covered the letter that I sent to Von Dadelson, and he replied that there was temple was going to be shut. And I think we covered a little bit on Percy Wilkinson as well. Mm-hmm. You met Jack. Excuse me. I think overall, what happened was that when I was Jack was determined that I was supposed to come up and see him. He knew in his letter to me. I wrote to Percy and Jack wrote back to me, which is sort of odd. I'd known about Jack from a guy by the name of Prior Wintle, who was an astrologer. And we were told Prior Wintle was a keen Crowley OTO member, but he's also a 4/7 member of Whare Ra. He was a very tall, he was English, very, very tall guy, and he was out here, he was in the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, and of course he got put off, and when you're a musician of that particular age, he was probably in his early 50s, maybe early 60s, I think, at that point in time. And he knew Percy Wilkinson. This is how it all came about. And he said, write to Percy, because Prior was an astrologer, and when he wrote to, he said, write to Percy, he was a person in order. He said, Jack Taylor is a main man, but he said, he probably won't reply to you, because he's a pretty important guy. So anyway, so as it turned out, I wrote to Percy. I said an interest. Percy took the letter to Jack. Jack then wrote back to me, and he said, I'm expecting day, and he's pointed in brackets, wrote in his letter to me. I said you were coming up to see me. He said, be in contact, let me know. And I got the letter on Friday, and I'd had the flight booked about a week before. So I was the next day I was in his living room.
So when was this? Is this 79, 80?
Probably 80, I think, 80, 81. I'm a little bit blurred of years there. My memory's good on some things and not on others. And so we turned up there with Chris, and in the short time that I actually contacted him, I rang him up by phone, and I said, well, I'm coming up by the next day, and he said, yeah, I know. And Jack, that's the way things worked. And anyway, so we arrived there to a room full of people. I didn't know why they were there. I thought I was just going to talk to Jack, and it must have been about 10 people, 12, hard to say. And they're all there in Jack's little regular living room, and they're all there to meet me, and I thought, this is crazy. But anyway, so he said, how can I help you with the Golden Dawn stuff? And he said, and I said, well, I need the first thing I know, I've got my own temple. I started telling him about the temple. We were running it, had been running it for about
Thoth Hermes.
running it for about a year or two. And it's gone a little bit earlier than that, but with Chris it was about a year or two. And it turns out that when I said, well, tell me about God forms. He said, oh yes, I was a hierophant down there at Whare Ra for many, many years. He used to go down and create the God forms before his ritual, and everyone stopped dead. The place you could hear a pin drop. Nobody had told them that he did that. It was one of these hierophant things. And so we got to the point, and then he explained what they did. I said, fine. Then I got to meet all these different people, Percy Wilkinson, and there's a couple of other people as well. There was the youngest guy there, who was a member of Whare Ra, I think he was there, was a guy by the name of Jonathan Collett. Now, Jonathan Collett was a 4/7 member of Whare Ra. I was about 30, about 32, I think. And he was about 24, 25. and he was very much into the OTO. A very clever chap, and I got on well with him with the little I had, and he was the one that filled me in on a couple of details that the others had missed. Anyway, so...
do you remember others by name of people that were in the room?
Well, there was... this is a room where you get introduced to people. Later, I found out there was Percy, who was 6'5", there was Barbara and Ann, Charlie and Ann, they were 5'6". There was another lady there, whom I think was Bethany Jones. They never introduced her as such, but she came in. It was Bethany Jones who made the cloak for me for the OTR, and she had my name and Enochian letters on it. She did that for me. And the lady was, I'm sure it was her, because she had... but anyway, so what it boiled down to was that, and there was at least about 4 or 5 others, and I think Bethany would have been about 7'4" then, I think, or something along those lines.
You don't remember any others by name?
Yeah, there was a William. See, this is it. I got thrown into that, and some of those people I never really saw again. So anyway, Chris has got a photo of us sitting there with Percy and Jack and a couple of others, and there was about 3 or 4 people from the OTR as well. Anyway, so what happened was then that started the friendship between me and Jack. So we stayed for a couple more days in Hawke's Bay. I went to see Jack then. Oh yeah. While I was there, Jack said, "There's a book you should get. It's called The Canon." He said, "I had it. Used to be in the Whare Ra library." And I said, "Okay." Now that particular night that I met Jack in the afternoon, and that night I was supposed to go and see Von Dadelson. I said I was coming up, and he said come around and see me. So I did. So we went around there for a cup of tea, so to speak. He was a tall, gaunt man. Tony Fuller described him as cold, and I tend to agree with him. He puts on a happy face, but there was nothing behind it. And his wife, he was 9'2", and his wife was 8'3", Michaela. Oh, this is funny. I'll tell you all about this. So then I learnt from him when I started asking. I made a list that I gave him. I gave him Francis King's book, Ritual Magic in England. I really had no use for it. And I gave him a chart of all the Golden Dawn temples that I'd made up. And he thought, thank you. And what he did was he said, "I got something for you." So he came back and he sent me, he gave me the Canon, the book that Jack Taylor told me about, because I hadn't seen it before. He said, "Here," he said, "take this is good." And he gave, and later, I can't remember if it was that night or another night, he gave me a small medallion of Dr. Falcon's. He said, "It's not from our temple," but he said, "Have this." It was a small silver thing with Yod Hey Vav Hey on it in different colours. So he said, "Here, have that. I think you might like that." He said, "It's not from our temple, but he said you might find that helpful." I said, "Thank you." When I started to talk to him, he was just all hat and nothing much else. He really didn't know the system.
Which is so weird, because he was chief.
Well, it turns out that his wife was Michaela, and she was the daughter of the main guy who had founded the whole Havelock work, which the Golden Dawn came from. And so that was by political appointment. His father was Von Dadelson's father was a 5'6", a former mayor of Havelock North. And he was a multi-millionaire who was head of owned a couple of newspapers and so forth and so on like that. He was very, very well off. Now, during the meeting, Chris was very quiet. When we got to the house, before we walked in, she didn't want to go in. I said, "Well, look, this is an opportunity we're not going to have."
With John or with the rest of the Adepti?
First of all, a house,
okay.
at Dadelson's house. But when she got in there, she kept quiet and she kept staring at a vase. And I thought, "Oh, okay." So I did the talking, and which wasn't new. And she got back and she said, "When you were in there," she said, "I saw a man's face appear in the bars, flashing eyes, and he was really aggro. And she said, I had to fight him off all night." And Von Dadelson said to me when we sat down, he said, there's an angelic presence with us tonight. I took his word for it. I didn't know what sort of angelic presence. I wouldn't know if it was good, bad, or indifferent. But anyway, so that was about it. So she told me about that. Anyway, the next day we went down and we spoke to Charlie and Ann. Charlie and Ann was Ian Ann. His nickname was Charlie, even called him that. Big strapping fellow, about 6'3", 6'4", huge grey hair, spoke with an impeccable English accent, looked like an English lord. that was Charlie. Beautifully golden tones and ritual. Incredible man, very clairvoyant. And when Chris told him, she said, well, I went to Von Dadelson's, I had an unpleasant experience there. And he said, you saw the man with the flashing eyes. And she said, yes, how did you know? He said, I've seen it too. He said, so that was both of them. That was their initial meeting and connection. And of course there was phone calls. My phone bill looked like a ransom note with Jack. I was ringing about 44 times a week.
One thing I find really astounding, I guess is the word, is when you said that Jack, when you asked him about the God forms, and he mentions the God forms, you got a room full of Adepti, all these people 5, 6, and probably other grades, and they don't seem to know even about the God forms. For me, that was when you first told me that story, it just hit me how each one of them was being trained and taught differently. Do you want to expound on that?
I could never work that one out. Tony Fuller said to me, "So that's in the Z documents." He said, "Yeah." I said, "But not everyone saw the Z documents. That was a problem. They held them all back."
And that's something to pay attention to. Like such it really, really kind of it changes your paradigm completely when you start to reflect on how they were taught. And
see how Whare Ra was. Whare Ra, the temple covered 2 towns, Napier and Hastings, on the east coast of New Zealand, and it was a rural area, and it was a vast area. And so what they did was they had to split it up into wardens, and there was, I think, at its peak, it was about 5 wardens. Now, warden took the duty of instructing people in ritual and training and things, because to get to Whare Ra in New Zealand roads in the 1920s and 30s was a very difficult task. You had to stay at someone's place overnight. Mm-hmm. So they met about once a month for ritual training, and the idea was that you would have the wardens teach you. They were the teachers, and then about once a month you would manage to go back and get whoever was teaching in the temple, whoever it might be, Dame Estrada, Emperor, whatever the case may be. In those cases, they interchanged their duties and offices to what you would read about in a text. So anyway, we got going with our temple and did a whole lot of stuff. And Jack was right behind us every inch of the way. We kept going up to Havelock North and meeting with Jack. And Chris would see, this is Chris's home, and she had a relative she wanted to see. We were stuck down in Wellington, which is freezing cold. And we came up to Havelock North, was like a Queensland summer here in Australia. It was very, very good. So she wanted to get around and talk to her relatives, and so my duty was to talk. She would come in, have to say hello to Jack, and then she would take off and pick me up about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's how that worked. So that was the sessions, those sessions continued in that particular vein.
So let's just pause for a second, hold your thought on that one. But so the temple's closed down. You meet with the chief, and he's already made it clear to you that that's done. The order's done. Now you meet up with a few adepts, 10, 12 of them in a room. And what made it that suddenly Jack Taylor wants to teach you? What did he feel the temple shouldn't have closed? Did he feel the order should keep going? Or what role you would play in that? Like, what made him want to take on this journey with you?
I don't think he wanted it originally. I think he wanted us to be in the OTR. He said that point outright. He said, my guys tell me you're going to take care of the OTR. Well, it turned out he was right, because Chris is now head of the OTR in New Zealand. So he's more directed at her in that respect. But I wanted more interested in Golden Dawn, even though we both later joined the OTR.
Just for perspective, what is the OTR?
Order of the Table Round. It was an Arthurian order developed by Neville Meakin. Very powerful order, magic. The temple hall was almost right beside Jack Taylor's house, and going down a little gully, and it was thick. The atmosphere was thick with magic. It was incredible. Anyway, Jack was all he maintained that the OTR Knight's degree was the equivalent of the 5-6. Well, for Jack, all these years at Whare Ra had switched him on to the OTR more than the GD, because he had a bad experience with Von Dadelson. Jack wanted to make changes in the order, and he had a group of people behind him for making those changes, and he said, we can't go on like this. So he went down there, and they said they did the right thing by him. They wanted to hear him out, and they said, well, we looked at the rituals and there's nothing there we want to change. Well, the reality was what they wanted to change was the people in charge.
Yeah, because they carried a lot of the stuff like pentagram, hexagram rituals into the OTR, correct?
Yeah, they did. That's a lot of that. So Jack rewrote many of the OTR rituals to formulate within the GD. But anyway, so the reason that Jack helped me like this because he had a dream that I was coming up and I was to be taught. And that's pretty much what he said. At the meeting, we were there that particular day. He said, look, I've been told that these people are coming up. Tell them anything they want to know about the GD. Waive the oath. He said, it doesn't matter, it's finished. And he said, tell them what they want to know. Be free with them. That's exactly what happened.
Your oaths were waived?
He waived their oaths, not my oath.
Yeah.
My oath, when I went through, because he gave me a 6-5 almost straight away after probably about 6 months after he found out what I knew. But I had to go back then and to go through the rituals, and he would teach me in secrecy and in the OTR hall. No one was to know. After Chris had taken off, I was to tell nobody, not even her. Chris had dropped me off. Then they would all come down to the hall, be secret about it, and then the next day we met in the OTR. They'd be like nothing ever happened.
So he recognized all of the work that you had done. He recognized you as a 5/6 and gave you the Adeptus Major.
It wasn't that. It was he was told to do it, basically. These guides through his dreams told him that I was to come and he was to do that. Now he never did that with anyone. He'd been asked before and he fogged everyone off. Why he did it with me, I have no bloody idea whatsoever, but it seemed to be what he was told to do, so he did it.
Oh, we're glad he did.
Yeah, well...
made all this possible.
Yeah, well, it's true in that respect. But Jack was very stubborn. He was always reading and about certain things. But he's very, very good. Very strong churchman. These people are all strong Church of England people. The whole thing was Christian orientated. And so that was where they were coming from. They had the Christian side and they had the Whare Ra side mixed together as a unit. And so that what they would do was bring it all together as a single unit rather than as a competitive aspect. I think that with Jack, a lot of Jack's papers got lost. They put it in a suitcase, and when he went down to Danivik or someplace in New Zealand, the suitcase got lost and most of his stuff had gone. But Percy Wilkinson had a duplicate of most of what Jack had. And as a result of that, Jack would tell Percy, give him the papers that he wants. And so I'd go to Percy, and Percy, I said, what have you got? Or have you got this? And Percy would bring it out and say, yeah, and I would take it back and have a look. And so we gradually got all the rituals and the associated documentation. And the astonishing thing I found out about Whare Ra was, and this is to its negative aspect, was that no one did any work on the tarot as far as documentation went. I couldn't believe it. The temple had gone for 70 years and I couldn't find one single tarot paper that I saw. There may have been some around, but I certainly didn't see them. And I keep asking them questions, why didn't you do more on this? And they said, well, the ritual was king and they worked on other things. So they didn't do that so much.
We know each warden, each adept essentially had their own flavor, their own way of teaching parts of the
Well,
system.
Frank was like Frank would teach like no one else would teach. Frank Soul, he would.
He was very biblical heavy.
Oh
right?
God, yeah. Jack and Frank had a real ding dong. Frank was going more biblical than Jack wanted. Jack was still biblical as well. Don't get me wrong, but Frank was just a little bit too much on the. You got to read the Bible here and interpret it this way. So when Frank when Frank got the Damon Strada's job in Napier, he started teaching biblical aspects, which he taught the Ian and Barbara and Ann, and they told me all about it, and they couldn't make head nor sense, because what happened when they got their 5/6, they went to Frank, and I said, well, where do we go from here? And Frank said to them, where do you want to go from here? That was it.
So what would you say Jack's main focus was when how he taught, or where did he
Jack
focus
was mystical. Jack was read a book, come back to me, and we'll go through and talk about it. Or read a paper. But I got on well with Frank. I was on the phone with Frank quite a few times a month, and I wrote him letters back and forth. And Frank, I couldn't understand at first. I didn't know his way of teaching. He had a different teaching method to Jack. Jack was my main teacher, but Frank always helped. He was very helpful to me. Hell of a nice guy, in my opinion. But Jack and him just didn't get on. It was teaching methods. Jack thought something should be taught one way, and Frank thought it should be talking another. But Frank had the authority. Jack didn't. Jack rebelled, and it was just Frank said it was black. Jack would say it was white, and that's just the nature of the two of them.
So early on, Jack gives you a 6.5, and did he give you any other grades after that, or how did it keep going from there?
Yeah, I got the 7.4. He said, take this. I went to see him in hospital, and he said, take the 7.4 now. He said, I don't know if I'm going to get out of hospital. I said, okay, so I'll just give it to you. And he got out of hospital, so I went back, and then he put me through in his living room, in his lounge room. And he took the thing off the fan and put a spinning wheel on the fan, and so he took us through the different levels.
Is that the time you took the etheric link as well? That you received?
Yeah, the etheric link was first. That was the first one he put me through. He put me through etheric link 6.5.
Oh wow.
7.4.
Didn't know that.
And what else? Yeah, that was the highest I got as far as Jack goes. But I'd met a few more. There was a lot of people that popped in to see Jack that I was introduced to, that I honestly, every time I'd come up, he'd tell someone, so someone would come in and meet me. I never knew who the hell they were. I'd never see him again. Like one guy came in as a 6.5, he says, oh no, he said, the rituals are dead now. He said, you've got to go into electricity stuff, Tesla. That's the way. Yeah. So there was all sorts of variations. They were all very good at ritual, though. They weren't incompetent by any stretch of imagination. They were ritual, but they weren't school book orientated.
I remember you telling a story about one particular woman that was a hegemon for like 20 years, and she was.
Well, that was Yvonne Salt. What we'd done, they hadn't seen our Enochian chess set. Percy Wilkinson had an Enochian chess set. He carved it from the Bethany Jones's set, and he told me, and he traced it, and he learnt under Ewan Campbell. He used to play Enochian chess with Ewan Campbell and two others. And Ewan Campbell made a song and dance out of it, that it was a good thing, and he got a lot of stuff from Ewan. And it was with Percy, he would not go into the details of the schooling. He would give you the basis of it, and you had to work it out for yourself, just like Jack. So a lot of it was do the ritual, get the feeling, discuss the feeling, go more, extrapolate, come back, talk it over, do some more, extrapolate, come back, talk it over until you understood the thing. It was like doing kata under a high Dan ranking. He'd show you the first way, you get the basic movements, and he said, is there something wrong? No, and then you move your foot 3 inches to the left or 3 inches to the right, and you're doing a hip turn. Exactly the same process.
Does that go with what you were telling me earlier about being brought into a room and then taken through the for example, the neophyte ceremony, step by step?
Oh, that was hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. The first time Jack said, get Chris to drop you off, he said, get rid of her. He said, don't tell anyone, not even her, and away we go. And so we turned up, and there was about 6 people there, I think. And they took me through the Naught, eyes open. So I went through and I did it, and they did it for me, a proper Naught. And that was the first time. So I get used to the feel, and I could see what was going on. The second time they took me through, they explained what they did. So they would go 3 or 4 steps and a stop, and Jack would say this. Then another officer would say, well, I experience this and that, and you have to keep an eye on that. And someone else would say, you've got to do this, and this. Now, these people were in the order from the 1930s to the 1960s. So there was a wide variety of 30-year period. And so stop here, look there, no, careful. And then you get to the point where they disagreed with each other halfway through, I think just before the Eucharist ceremony. MC did it this way, and SS, I wouldn't do it that way. Miss Fulton did it that way. And I was taught by so-and-so, was taught by doctor, said this way. And then there was an argument between the 3 of them of what actually the thing meant. What they were doing was looking at different layers. They were all taught different layers by different people.
I think this is so important. Like it goes back to the thing we were saying earlier about almost being taught a certain angle or a certain part of the system, but not necessarily everything else. And then depending on who you had as a...
Well, you can get the guts of the Golden Dawn system basically fairly easy, but to get the different angles and assimilate that into a workable flowing pattern is a totally different ballgame. And the only way you do that was with time. So we pushed and worked, and eventually I think Regardie came out to New Zealand here. I think I mentioned that earlier in the previous video.
Yeah, very briefly, but we didn't get to talk about Regardie. I mean, this would be a good time, actually, because I remember you describing at one point him coming into a room filled with documents, like him not being aware even that there was a fully functional temple. And,
well, yeah, he had met people from Whare Ra before. He met Bill Oliver and his wife. It was Bill Oliver or Bill Gilmore. I can't remember which one. They'd gone over there and they'd met up with him, probably, I think, in the 1970s.
Okay, so he had been before he came to
He
meet you.
knew about them. And I said, these two people were 7'4". I said, and he said, I didn't know that. They didn't say what rank they were. And he didn't think much of them. And that was the way Francis was, Regardie, called him Francis. You had to prove yourself to Francis before he would say anything good. You had to prove it. And he would challenge you and work all the way through. And when he came out to meet me, first of all, he said, I'm coming out to New Zealand to see you. And I said, you sure? What the hell do they want to see me for? But anyway, so he did.
This was in 83, somewhere around there?
August of 83.
Yeah.
And I was 7'4" then. I had my 7'4" very early on. I got 6'5", and I think, because I was already working the rituals at that point in the temple for a year or two. And but anyway, so what happened was that when he came out with Patricia Beeman, we did a divination reading to see how it would go with Patricia Beeman. And everything we got was negative. Everything. And I thought, well, what do we do? He's coming out here. Do we say we don't want to help? And then I had a bit of an insight. I said, what if Patricia's friends or people that she'd contact would contact us later, and we could probably help them if they needed it? So we did a reading on that, and it turned out to be right. So we would go negative with Patricia, but her people she was in contact with, we would then jump her over basically and try and help them, not ignore her, but be in contact with her. So we had to just put up with the negativeness until she calmed down or whatever she did. And that's exactly what happened. The I Ching divination was absolutely correct. She tried to, her eyes just, I said, she had been no training. Regardie did not train her whatsoever in the temple stuff. There was none of that. She had no idea. I was astounded. He said to me, I said, you've trained her. He said, oh yes, I gave her, she did the Watchtower ceremony, and I gave her the 5-6. I said, Francis, I said, you're fucking nuts. He looked at me, got astounded. I said, relax. I just shook my head with that one. But I kept going, he just took a bit of offence. Anyway,
did he ever train anyone, period, in the GD, or initiate anyone?
Well, I asked him that. He said, first of all, in his later years, it just wasn't up to him to do it. Cicero's first wife came out and he helped her with the colour scales. She went to Sedona and he was helping her out with that. I don't know what he did with Chicken Tabby, I have no idea. But he told me in August of 83 he hadn't trained anyone except Patricia, and she'd been through Bota, so she had a knowledge, and he just gave her the Watchtower. He would give her a book and say, go do it, and then come back and he'd have a look at it, the pentagram rituals. She was very much into dramatic ritual, standing up there where I'd go and doing things, but I never got much use from her at all. I got chaos, really. Anyway, so what happened, we gave her the 6-5, we thought that would help her out, and turned out it made her nuts. And after that, she was doing a thing, and I wrote to God, I said, this woman's not stable. He said, don't worry about her, no. My boy, she's just like that, mate. And he kept apologising for her all the time. They had a very, very awkward relationship. Almost pistols at dawn, every morning, every night, fight arguments. But anyway, so during the table, we had a dinner at our place in the kitchen table one night, and she said to him, no, I think Chris asked him a question. She said, did you plan to start the Golden Dawn from America? And he said, oh, no. And Pat put the knife and fork down, got into a snarly thing. And I was sitting right next to her, and Regardie was on the other side, and she reached across me, having a roast dinner, which is not a good thing to do because I love a roast dinner, grabbed him by the shirt, and I pulled her hand away. You're a lying so-and-so. I saw all your bloody robes and things you were doing. And then he looked at me and he said, oh, yes, well, I had that idea, but when I got to the States, it didn't work. So he'd written the books, which is what Tony Fuller figured, not only to protect the order, in his words, up to a point, but he wanted to be head of it because he thought that the later conversations I had with people he was with were, he felt he was better. I'm not trying to be critical of Regardie, I'm just saying that's what he felt. And I think in certain cases he was probably right, as far as knowledge of the order, but knowledge of the order is not the same as doing the rituals. He had no training in the rituals at all, apart from going through them. He told me that himself, that was by his thing. But anyway, so this started an argument up right across the kitchen table. I thought, geez, I'm never going to get to finish my dinner after this. So what happened then was he admitted that he was going to start the order up in New York. So there was pretty obviously to draw a connection to he published the order material, was going to go to America and set himself up as head of it. That was the way to go. But what happened, I think, and how he was going to do that was start a correspondence course up. And he started that up, and I saw the course was just basic pentagram rituals, hexagram rituals, a couple of things. They sent me all this stuff and had a look at it. It was going to go nowhere. Paul Case had that nailed down. Anything Regardie brought up as far as ritual work.
You mean with Boda?
Boda, Paul Case and Boda, would have been far in advance of what he wanted to do. He had the knowledge that Paul Case did, but he didn't want to sit down there and write a whole course. Now, I've done this. I've written a whole course that took me about 6 years to write.
Which we'll talk about in another interview.
Yeah. So as a result of that, anyway, Regardie liked what I did. One of the things about him is we were sitting there talking about the colour scales. Now, what happened was I said, well, I'll ring Jack. Jack was a colour nut. So he spoke to Jack Taylor, and they were arguing a little over the colour scales. Jack liked Regardie. But it turns out that I said Crowley used the same colour scales on the minor arcana and stuff like that.
On the top deck, yeah.
He put his hand over, patted me on the knee and said, you show me, my boy, you'll show me. So he got up and I went to the study where I had the colour scales on the wall, and I had the top deck, which I quite liked. And I took out a series of cards, which was easy to show the colours, differentiation. He come down the hallway just about 5 minutes later, on the way to the bathroom, and I said, Francis, you want me to show you now? I'm going to bloody well show you. Come on in and have a look at this. That's exactly what I said to him. So I treated Regardie as Regardie. I didn't treat Regardie. I didn't want anything from the man. I didn't want a rank. I had a 7-4. I had all the training I had from Jack. Mm-hmm. But I liked Regardie, and something just drew me to him to a certain extent. I felt that he was right in publishing, and my first incept into the Golden Dawn was reading Regardie's books. From there, but a lot
of people wouldn't be here today.
And what he did was he gave the overall part of the system, which made it good. But Whare Ra, his name was, they said a lot of lies about him. I said he never got the 5-6. I told him that. I said, relax, I believe you. But but he got to be upset over that. I said, they're lies. I said, calm down, have a whiskey. So that was the funny part about that. So anyway, when he came down there, I got the 4 colour scales from the top deck, put them against each tree, of the path of each tree, and say, look, there, and there. And he looked at it for a moment. He turned me, shook his head, he said, I never knew that. Well, it wasn't new. Mrs. Falcon mentioned this in that 1925 lecture. So it wasn't a new concept of the colour scales going into the cards. It was there.
You're saying you thought it was a good thing that Regardie published, but he was also quite in support of you publishing as well.
Yes, he was. He told me, first thing he went into my room, and I had my library in, what was to call it, in Wellington. I think I had something like a couple of thousand books, plus stacks of stuff from the British Library, and Oh, really? Much photocopies around the place. And I think overall that it was really quite large, and I had stacks of documents. I had them in grey filing cabinets all over the place, and he pulled out one. I pulled out one drawer to show him something. He said, "He's just like me. This is what I've got." I said, "Yeah, well, you can have a look at the other two cabinets. I've got it's like that full." But my idea was not that have papers. My idea was I'd like it all in a book and just pull it out and read the book rather than going through doing a whole lot of papers. That was my attitude. Probably not exactly a career improvement one, but still that was the attitude that I have it. And so we talked, and he told me about his stories about Dion Fortune, about what he went through at Bristol and the problems he had and what he happened when he went to America and so forth and things like that. But he was a very easy guy to like. He said, "I broke my oath." Yes, I broke my oath. He brought that out straight away. So that was it.
But he describes that in his, Rosicrucian Adventure, and of why he felt he needed to do that, right?
I believe he did. But you got to regard he was very, very an extremely complex individual, and he was like a fox terrier. If you even hinted you wanted to do a wrong thing for him, he'd come in and bite you at the heels all the time.
He's Scorpio.
It was like that all the time. But I'm a pretty easygoing sort of a guy. I'm a Gemini, so 21st of May, right on the cusp, which means we're a weird bunch anyway. Jack was a Gemini too, so we hit it all pretty well. Anyway, so him and I corresponded back and forth, and he opened the door and said some good things about me to people in Pasadena. After his death, I went over there with Laura Jennings, and we went to Poke Runyon's place. It was a big grouping. I met a whole lot of people. Jim at Poke was one of the guys there. Anyway, so Paul from his ex-boater. So anyway, they're nice people. I thought they were anyway.
And when's the last of the Whare Ra Adepti that you saw? Like when was the last encounter you had with any of them?
Oh, I think just when Percy's wife was a member of the Whare Ra, but she was only outer order. I don't know what she was. It was quite funny. Percy had all these papers, and Christine had connected with a group of people in that particular area while we were living in Wellington, which is a few hundred miles south, and. She went up and she did a full course, I think the 12 months course was condensed for Alex Gathercole, who was a student of Frater Albertus. The leading person up there was Colleen Larson. She had actually had done experiments with Rigardi, because I saw Rigardi's papers after he died, and Colleen Larson's name was on, and I knew Colleen. She used to own Hermes Books up in Havelock North. I didn't know that. And she got Frater Albertus to come out and have a look and see if he wanted to establish a college in New Zealand. And so she brought Frater Albertus up to meet Jack Taylor. And I said, "Well, what do you think of Frater Albertus?" She said, "My opinion was that Frater Albertus thought quite a lot of himself." But so that didn't go anywhere. The problem was that Frater Albertus would sit down, his off-sider would be there, and he'd be talking to Jack. And instead of Frater Albertus saying something, the off-sider would come and say, "Well, Frater Albertus thinks that." And Jack said, "He's sitting here. Let him answer." That was a weird way of doing it. See, there was this acolyte concept that they had in America. They had it with Ann Davies and things like that. And this is what they were doing. They had it with, a lot of people thought Rigardi in that way too, but I didn't. He was just a good guy whom I liked. And he was very helpful, and I got on well with. I thought he did some funny things, but he thought I did some funny things as well, so that was about an even split. He was about 70, I think I met him in 83, I don't know his age, I think it would have been 75, 77, somewhere around that period. He died the year later, so it's 1 year before he died. So that he came to see us. But the biggest problem is because people were reading texts. This is what prompted me to publish. I kept getting letters after Rigardi died. I got dozens, maybe even hundreds of letters from people who knew Regardie, because he was very kind about me, and they got my address, was very well known at that time. I keep getting these letters from people who want to come out and train. I said, or wanted me to go and teach them, or wanted to come and stay with us.
Well, and probably they saw that you also gave him an honorary 6.5, and after he died, a 7.4, correct?
I still think I did the right thing, but you've got to understand Regardie's view. He would never accept a 6.5 or a 7.4 as like he would the 5.6.
Mm-hmm.
He was above that. That's the way he looked at it. No one's going to teach him anything. That's the way he looked. But I thought, I don't know. Would I do it again? The answer is yes.
Mm.
That was my thinking. A lot of people I know Tony Full would be, if he's watching this, would probably throw something at the screen. I had this out with Tony before. But anyway, I think that, I think an appreciation for what he'd done. Sometimes people, even if they're selfish and got their own ideas on things, are picked out by fate, the gods or whatever, to do a certain task. And to do that particular task, which would help a lot of people, it would be unsavoury to some of the people to do it. But the benefits would be enormous. And Regardie's benefits have been enormous. But also, the problem is that while he put his text out, the text didn't give all the nuances of how to handle the rituals. Most of the papers were guides. They were never, you do it this way instead of that way.
Yeah, and a lot of times even his own interpretation or little commentaries he has in there, it's very sort of a bit like a very, how can I say, just a very straightforward linear way of interpreting.
Well, Regardie virtually did no interpretation at all that I could see.
Mm-hmm.
I had his notes from his Nokia notes from when he was in England, and they're just transcriptions.
Right.
I didn't see any extrapolations. He brought things down. He distilled them, but I didn't see him go and do anything additional. Even in his Concourse of Horses, which I thought was a addendum to the Concourse of Horses, which I thought was a good book, was still an extrapolation of Crowley's work.
Yeah.
So virtually, with the exception of the Bonorum.
Right.
Yeah. But so he didn't do that. His idea was to help, and the people would do it themselves. We'd get someone to have a look at it and get back to him, and he would do it. He was too old to do the work, in his opinion. I know how he feels. I'm only about 2 years. I'm 74 now. In 6 years, I'm going to be 80, and I think, good God.
So he passed away. You started receiving dozens of letters from people.
Yeah, wanting to come out and train. And I said, I wrote back, I said, well, if you get out here, give me a ring. But they didn't want that. They wanted us to put them up. So I just got sick of it in the end. I didn't reply to half of them. And that was also after my book was published as well.
The first one, 1988.
Yeah. That was the one.
You mentioned Tony Fuller. Back when you were traveling and meeting up with all these adepti.
Yeah, Tony and I have known each other for God, I don't know.
Because you're the same age.
Yeah, I'm 3 months older. For nearly 35 years or somewhere around that period.
Did you ever encounter each other with the adepts up there?
We all knew each other. I knew Frank. Tony had met Jack. I'd met Frank. So we all knew each other as teachers, and we all had an idea of what the other one did. Tony was extremely gifted individual in many, many respects. He was the one. He edited the 4 books that I did for that are now part of the ritual commentaries as separate books. He edited them. I sent them to Tony, and Tony sent them back, and we swapped stuff left, right, and centre. We first met when I was doing tarot card readings. I was reading a book on Francis King, who wasn't Francis King, the author, but Tony Casordi walked by the booth and said, "Oh, is that?" I said, "No, it's not the same one." So we met each other, and we became friendly. He came down to our house a couple of times. We communicated by phone, and we're on the same planet there. We're a little bit cagey with each other for a while, but it was okay in the end. Tony and I don't agree on everything. We have had some ding-dong dust-ups over certain things, some of it publicly, but he was very good. He got a 7.4 under. He got it done properly through Frank Salt and Archie Shaw, who put him through, and that was great for Tony. I thought more to... And Tony had a very good understanding of things. He's a well-educated individual. He knew what was coming up. He had the boater training to go with it. And he was able to pinpoint things. And between the two of us, I think we were a little surprised at each other's abilities in some respects. Together we could work something out. Where we couldn't individually, we could guess, but together we pretty much formed it. And when Tony went to England, what happened was after I left New Zealand in May of 1999 to come back here to Australia, Tony left a year after me. He went to England. So we both left the country. And we got very, very friendly, more so than we got very close. And we still are, than we've ever been before. And Tony's been enormously helpful to me. He's been a helpful friend, a guide, supplied papers, and we've talked about things, and we talk to each other on Skype or Facebook, and we exchange views and ideas, and we build on them. So we had a relationship I wish we would have had back in New Zealand, but Tony was still good. I'd given Tony, just before I left, I called Tony up and I told him, I said, look, I'm leaving for Australia, and I want to give some Golden Dawn stuff to you, like Jack Taylor's notebooks and things. And I said, yeah, fine. So he turned up at Hastings at our new house that we just bought, and so he took the things, and he took them over to the UK, and he's with his contacts and the way that Tony works. He can ferret out documents that I think other people can't. He's got arguably the best new GD collection in the entire world today, and he probably had it a long time before that, even better than Bob Gilbert's. And Tony would put me right, and we both knew the same people, so what we started to do was build up an idea of who taught what they taught at Whare Ra, who taught what, and also the standing and the level of competency. So we worked it together because my group came primarily through the OTR, Whare Ra Adepti, and Tony's came from another group entirely. So we're both able to put it together. We both supported each other. You know, there was one interesting thing in New Zealand. If you see Tony and I, as I said, we had some ding-dongs and don't agree on some things, but we got over that in 5 minutes. But there was, that's right. I revealed, I think for the first time, probably about 8 or 9 years ago, that the way they taught at Whare Ra was you were given a little bit and you had to build on it. Mm-hmm. And one person, whose name I won't mention, sent an email saying, "Oh, you can't have things willy-nilly like that. You know, I don't believe you," words to that effect. And but Tony jumped in and he said, "No," he said, "Pat's right. That's exactly what happened." Kaz Millis jumped in as well and said the same thing. And what happened at one point on one of the forums, I don't know, well, it could have been the Yahoo forum, I can't remember. The three of us were saying it was done this way in New Zealand about the teaching methods, and we're all three were not disagreeing with each other, and we even though we knew there was a lot of flexibility there, but they could not comprehend that the documents for them were black and white. They couldn't comprehend that they were not simply guides. That's the way you had to do it. Because that was a teaching, there was nothing else to drive them. Where we knew that they were guides only in certain areas, and you had to interpret it a certain way. And the three of us at one thing were just about feeling like Horatio at the bridge holding the barbarians back from Rome, because we were all saying the same thing, and none of these people who were having a shot had ever been taught by Golden Dawn people proper, even Rigardi.
Which is interesting because it means you have a big community, an entire culture being built on what the tradition is, mostly by people who've never been actually trained in it, who bought Rigardi's Golden Dawn book and then they're shaping the view and the approach to it. I'm not saying it's a wrong approach. Obviously, it's going to evolve how it evolves, but it's interesting. It's an interesting dynamic.
Well, that happened to me. I got through. Try and get it in the frame here. I got through Rigardi's books. That's all I had to go by. Mm-hmm. And because I got through Rigardi's books, I knew what it was to do that, and I knew the gaps and the pauses and what you just didn't know. It was quite a lot of stuff. And then when I went up with Jack and he said, "No, you do this, and you stand there, you fill it up. What do you do? How does it work?" And it was incredible. The best I ever found was Yvonne Salt Frank's wife, I met her some years ago. She knew Tony as well. They got on very well. And we're sitting down there on a sofa together, and I was watching the Nans play Enochian chess with Chris and one of my students. They're playing Enochian chess at that time. They were all excited about seeing the Enochian chess set. And Yvonne, then I started to ask her questions about the Naught symbolism, and she understood a lot. She understood the energy dynamics of the whole thing because she was 20 years as a Hegmon, took the part, knew it back to front. But she kept telling me about energy dynamics, and one of the things that she told me, which I demonstrated when I went over to Montreal with you, was she was sitting between the pillars one night. There was a husband and wife had a bit of an argument, and she knew that the energy dynamics were going to go off because they didn't like each other at that particular point in time, and so she had to put the energy through the pillars to go out to them. And then she explained she knew about the God forms as well, about the energy dynamics and how to work the system, how to hold back, what to do, how to push, and things like that. And Yvonne, I sat there for about 3.5 hours, maybe more, and she explained the whole thing to me in a way that Jack and Frank had never even touched. Because she knew that by knowing one officer's job, she could extrapolate that to any officer's position.
Yeah, and this is the kind of stuff you wouldn't get in Z1 nor Z3.
No, you just wouldn't get it. And she was amazing, absolutely amazing. And I still to this day, I wanted to know about God forms. Yvonne explained how they worked. The God forms were just a shell of the energy dynamics that was being shuffled around like a chess game. And she knew what was doing. She told me how to look at what to look for, how to do the break, how to bring things together. Taught me the whole thing. I sat there and I was dumbfounded. You could not. And she was a Hegmon. She was. They gave her a 5-6 before the temple shut. I remember that. They must have done a Portland 5-6 together, and that was about all. But she was. They all knew how good she was. Believe me, they told me before we met, and they said to her straight to her face.
But that contrast you described of you starting off with Rigardi's book, and then what happened when you encountered these people. I experienced the same thing with you. I was initiated as through an order that started from Rigardi's books, and when I got in touch with you, which we'll talk about in another video cast, but the same contrast happened. I quickly realized that all this very linear approach to the system that I learned, I had to unlearn to be able to kind of adapt to this approach that's very much more fluid, much more flexible, and less black and white, in taking all these documents as being dogma almost.
Yeah, that's the problem today. And the two people got nothing else to go on. And people don't want to believe me. They think I'm just trying to make this stuff up. But Tony's backed me up, and I've backed Tony up. Kaz Mills does the same thing. So we're all singing the same song, basically, to a certain extent. So, but they don't want to know, because what's happened is they've developed a hardened viewpoint. It may have no basis in reality at all about how things were done and the importance of documentation as far as the rigidity of documents go.
Well, you threatened the status quo.
Yeah, I did, and I still to this day get that. I'll give you a good example is the names on the elemental weapons. People, there's one person who I won't name, had a bit of a go at. They said, Wayne got it wrong and everyone followed by mistake and it should be this. Well, that was bullshit from start to finish. First of all, what you put on the elemental weapons were guides. Okay, even you got to consider that those papers were guides. There was papers, there are elemental weapons with nothing on, with a cross on, with Christ's name on only, and elemental weapons with the 4 rivers on. Some with Elohim Gabor, some with just the river itself, some with the Adonai or Agalar or whatever the case may be. They're all varied, and some had the whole lot as a combined unit. They were never. Their weapons had to be taken to Mrs. Falcon to get tested. This was a test. Did they work? So that was. Well,
if anything, if you put more names, you're going to add to the narrowness. Of
well,
the
when I first started, I did my fire, my knife. It's got every name on it but the kitchen sink, because I didn't really know the answer. But it's a very strong, powerful knife.
It is.
But the thing is, you can still get just as much out of that by just having a basic tool with nothing on it. If your belief and actions go through, so it really the names are on there to help you. They're ingrained in you. They're there as an image to stimulate things, and names have power too. Written names as well as verbal names if they're applied correctly. So, but if I had to do it now, I had to do it all over again. I just have one name. Jack kept saying to me, he said, the highest names first, that's all you need. You do not need anything than the highest names. So since I did my elemental weapons long before I met Jack, I already had them on, but I learnt the other stuff later. Was how it worked. But these papers were guides, and the biggest problem you'll find when the flying rolls is if you look at the flying rolls and try and take those rigid things in stone like the Ten Commandments, you're going to you shoot your own foot. I mean to say you're going to come along and meet yourself, because some of the guys, both Jack and Frank, never liked the flying rolls. There's some good ones in it. Mathers wrote the flying roll 10, but they weren't fully explained. They were just the bare bones of the system. If you look at the flying rolls, is the flying rolls 10 for the 5, 6, or what? I think I've forgotten.
Yeah.
The
crucifixion.
The God forms change every couple of seconds. How do you account for the change? How does it work? There are rhythms and patterns that do account for that, but you've got to know what the rhythms and patterns are for that to work as a baseline. People who can read Regardie's text can get a good temple going and do well. I've done it myself. I was one of them. Put my hand up for that. But when I found out the flexibility of the order, it got better. That's the distinction. Miles better. You know yourself. You did exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it becomes a living, breathing entity.
Yeah, it becomes an entity in itself, and that's what it's all about. So,
I got two last things I want to get into.
Right.
So, of all these Whare Ra Adepti, are any of them still alive today?
The only ones that I know of that are still alive probably was Jonathan Collette. I think I mentioned him.
Yeah.
He would probably be in his late 60s. Got to 470. He was in the OTR.
And Barbara Nan, right?
I know that she's there all gone, the whole lot. I think Tony told me that, I don't know whether Beryl Wren's still alive. She was a member of the temple for a short time. She'd be about nearly 100 if she is. She was only in the temple for a short time, I think. By the way, in the 1960s when Beryl Wren and her husband came over, they opened up the Sun Temple, which is the Sun Order, which is the Cromlech Temple, and Mrs. Carnegie Dixon gave them the papers for the Sun Order. And what happened was that only after a couple of years here in New Zealand, Wren died of a heart attack. He died right in front of Charlie Nan, who held him when he died. So they were in connection with the Sun Order. I think they're doing a ritual. I'm not too sure. I don't know the full ins and outs of that. And they'd only been in the country a very, very short time. Von Dadelson actually told me about this couple. He didn't mention them by name, but I knew who it was. He said there was a young couple who didn't want to. He thought they wanted to go beyond 5'6", and with the temple closing in England, Bristol Temple. John Von Dadelson said to me that he went to Bristol, I think it was about 1960, was still there, and about 1961 it had shut, or 2 years later. And the relatives of the chiefs decided they wanted nothing to do with people coming in and having a look. But what happened was that the people who came out to New Zealand, the Wrens, they got the 5. He was a 5'6". I don't think she was. I think she was in her order, according to Barbara. But they started the Sun Order, and that was a totally different ball game.
Well,
which died of death, incidentally.
This brings me to the last thing. Temple goes on for 66 years, initiates over 250 people into the Second Order over this period of time. More than that. Yeah. Obviously, when you're meeting these people, they're still practicing, they're still wanting to teach, they're still passionate about it.
No, not all of them, no. Some of them just wanted dead and buried. What happened was that
But why did they close it, I guess, is what I want to get to. In 1978, they decided they're closing it down.
Well, Percy Wilkinson summarised it. I don't think it was right, but he said with the membership dwindling away, And he said the chiefs thought that they would have had to pay the rates on a big, huge property. See, Whare Ra was not just one house. It had a couple of acres of ground around it in a prime real estate. The rates or land taxes on that would have been like a ransom note every year, and a couple of grand at least. And they didn't want to pay that indefinitely.
So you think the financial reasons are
Well, that was Percy Wilkinson's idea,
right?
but I go a little bit further than that. The real to understand Whare Ra, you got to understand Tauhara, which was the place on the Lake Tahoe, Lake Taupo. No, Lake Tahoe. And sorry, I'm getting mixed up with the American one. And what happened was that Mrs. Falcon wanted to establish a place where everyone could meet. She was convinced in the 1930s that a master was coming to New Zealand. This master was going to teach and be well known along those areas. And so she said she wanted to prepare a place for him. So they bought this thing on the shores of this very cold place, middle of New Zealand, North Island. It's easy to see. And so they had this. They built a huge place for people to stay, and it was a conference centre essentially, and there was a meditational centre as well. It nearly folded at one point, but a lot of people from Whare Ra got behind it. When they sold Whare Ra, the money was about 190,000, I think it was, whatever it was. This is back in '78. Went to Tauhara, so they cleaned them of all their debts, and it was basically debt free. So, and the head chiefs, the three main chiefs of Whare Ra, Von Dadelson, Nancy Hobson, and the other one, they all were the trustees of Tauhara. Now, previous to that, previous to that, they were told that a man was coming up. McDowell, who was a theosophist, he maintained that there was a master coming to New Zealand. Mrs. Falcon got the same thing, and someone put him in touch with each other. So he came to New Zealand to meet Mrs. Falcon, and they got on pretty well from what I hear. And then they both decided to put their energy into Tauhara to prepare for the masters. Now, previous to that, Jack Taylor had a premonition or a dream back in the 50s, I think it was, he told me, that Whare Ra was going to close. So he said, and it was a reoccurring dream. And so he went over to Mrs. Falcon, or MC, as he called it. They all called each other by my names, MC, Jack was SS, things like that. And MC, SS is coming, watch out for BL, but that's the way it worked, you know. Mm-hmm. And so he went and he told her, and she says, I know. She said, but don't tell anyone. So she knew the temple was going to go toes up after her. And so they were preparing. Jack knew straight away that it wasn't going to last. And so he put all these energies basically into the thing. His wife was a 7-4 as well, very good astrologer. And so after the idea was the head of Whare Ra was also the head of the OTR. But Von Dadelson, because of his personality, or lack of it, whichever way you want to look at it, had a face-off with Jack. So Von Dadelson thought, my status as head chief will see me through. It didn't. Mm-hmm. Jack was the one who put the work in. Jack was the one they trusted. And Jack was the one they all came for instructions of, even people from Frank, which caused a big argument with Jack and Frank. I don't think... Frank, Jack and Frank, that's an all new ball game in itself. But this is how they worked. Jack was teaching some of Frank's students, and Frank got angry and turned up at the doorstep, and they had a real Barney on the doorstep of Jack's place about taking his students. We should be mindful, and so this all went on. This is the way it was. So that's why they didn't get on too well. But I think...
I wish I was up there and they were arguing to teach me which one's going to...
Yeah, well, I got the arguments in minuscule when I go through the bloody rituals, but that's the way it was. But the thing was that a lot of people at Whare Ra were never given full documentation as Regardie laid out. They were given, the wardens would sometimes create their own documents, as Frank did. Mm-hmm. Frank was a warden before he was demonstrator, as far as I recall. Tony could put me right on that. And they would then come along and teach people, and they'd give them out papers. I haven't seen these papers, but Tony tells me that Frank Salt had gone into an Okeana, he's gone to the whole thing, and he did the full 9 yards of it, probably more so than others. So Frank had a pretty darn good overall picture of the individual nuances within the order.
Hmm.
So Frank had that knowledge.
He's got a whole series on that, like each Hebrew letter, for example.
Tony knows more about that than I do. I never would go to Frank and ask him to teach me individual things. I'd ask about certain points of reference and things like that. But Frank was very helpful to me. Never nasty, got on very well, and if Jack wouldn't give me an answer that I could understand, I'd get it from Frank. And Frank would tell me something I couldn't understand, I'd go to Jack. But Jack was my primary teacher. Frank I wrote to on a regular basis, and he was helpful, and he would give me helpful hints about doing certain things a certain way. A lot of it was, I think, was despite Jack, but still he did it, so I was quite pleased about that.
But why did they close it? I mean, you got these high-ranking members.
Well, von Dadelson was not capable of it. Tony says it best. Frank said about von Dadelson that he didn't get it. He did not get the order.
So the guy who's in charge basically is not...
Oh, well, I'll tell you another story. When Barbara and Ian Nairn got their 5.6 in the 50s, about 50, I don't know, 58, somewhere around there, they went to stay the night at the von Dadelson's place for the weekend. They went through the portal one time and the 5.6 and X. Mrs. Falcon was still alive there. And definitely. And it turns out that when they got their 5.6, I think it was that weekend or the weekend after, I can't remember. They had to come in from out of town because they lived on a farm or a sheep station. And so they had to stay the night and have up north, and they stayed at von Dadelson's because Charlie was a big, empowering individual, upper-class English accent type of person. Von Dadelson was no mean feat in himself, but no one could compare with Charlie for dynamicism. You was in a room with Charlie, you knew he was there, what was going on. And so what actually happened, they said, oh, let's do something. Let's do a projection or astral travel. And then Michaela Pipe said, oh, we haven't done anything like that before. Because I told Harry about it. I said, oh, Jesus. So Barbara and Charlie both knew, thought this is weird. So anyway, so they got together and they had to do what's called the path working, the equivalent of it. Mm-hmm. So they all sat down there, and Charlie decided he wanted to play a trick on von Dadelson. He said, yes, I can. This is what he told me in his own mannerisms. Yes, I can see the green unicorn there. It's coming up to you, John. Yes, it's definitely my guide. John say, yes, I see the green uniform. I see the unicorn. I'm following this unicorn. And he never saw any bloody uniform. And Barbara's kicking the shit out of him under the table. And Charlie and von Dadelson, and the whole room, but the four of them were seeing green unicorns. It was just a way of making fun of von Dadelson, I think. Charlie knew von Dadelson during that they were boys together during the war, First World War, because von Dadelson had a German name. Charlie had to protect him from getting beat up. Oh. So Charlie was his protector from primary school, because Charlie was just immense size. No one messed with Charlie. I think he was a group captain during the war, I think, or squadron.
So von Dadelson's basically an unqualified person who found himself running things, and in 78 makes the decision. And he
didn't want everything to do it. Now, his wife, Michaela, who was the daughter of Reggie Gardner, who was the main founder of the order up there, the group, head of the group, she hated the order because Dr. Falcon used to make her put on green stockings and things when she had skin problems. And she would go to school with green stockings on. The kids would point out and laugh at her. So she hated the order. She didn't want anything to do with it, even though she got to A3. And they all said this. It wasn't... and they all said this. So they got in positions of power, and they were ill-equipped. Both of them were ill-equipped. They were intelligent people, don't get me wrong, but they got in because of their status. That was the way it worked. Frank will tell you the same thing. He said pretty much the same to me as well. That's what he didn't say, the way he said it. But they got in because of their status, and there were people who were eminently qualified to run the temple, but because von Dadelson was a high-pressure man, I think he was a coroner. Percy Wilkinson said he was only good for teaching, presiding over dead bodies. It was Percy's viewpoint. I used to say that on a regular basis to me. Well, they all thought that. No one liked him because he wasn't a pleasant person. Tony Fuller met him more. I only met him a couple of times. Tony met him quite a lot.
And he ended up, after he closed everything down, he burned truckloads of documents, everything.
Yeah, there were sacks and sacks, big, huge wool bagfuls of documentation just were burnt. And they wanted to do that, and there was a couple of people in there that were glad to help him out. He didn't want the burden of Whare Ra. He didn't want to teach it. He was good. He could teach you where to stand, where to hold your sword, and do things like that. That was the book stuff. Anything else beyond that, no. So he's good at stage direction only. That was his forte, and he didn't do a fraction of the work that he was supposed to do.
Sounds more like a manager than an adept, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good summary of him. I had nothing against him personally, except what I thought he did to the order, because I think it all fell on his shoulders, and he couldn't hack it. And all he wanted to do was to go to Tauhara and play act as the quasi manager of Tauhara. So that was part of what that was about.
Well, as much as it's unfortunate that obviously ended up closing everything down, I think we're all very, very lucky that somehow you ended up being in touch with Jack, and not all this stuff came through.
Well,
through you.
I couldn't have worked under them at Whare Ra. I couldn't have. I would. Tony, I don't know, and Casmillis, my hatters off to them both. They had to go under Frank's teaching, which was very convoluted at times, very difficult, and it took staying power, real staying power, where I don't know if I could have coped with that. But on the other hand, I was unfettered to a certain extent. No one told me I could do whatever I wanted as far as it goes. I could look at certain things. I wasn't prevented from doing it. And it gave me a quality where I could look at a whole range of things, and then, because one of the things I'm good at, I'm not good at many things, but one of them is pattern recognition. So I could see the pattern recognition in the things. I could put them together very, very easily. Mm-hmm. Some people couldn't do that. It's just the way you are. Some people are good at maths. I'm not. Some are really good. That's just the way you're made. But I think they closed it. They said they were going to have a meeting, and they never ever did. They said and everyone got caught by surprise. A lot of people, but they wanted to sell the place, take the money, put it into Tauhara, where Von Dadelson used to go down there, and he was he was running around doing zodiac dances and things like that, and being the big chief and people looking up to him. That was he wanted to do with no responsibility whatsoever.
It's crazy. Picture this, right? Whoever's listening, you're a member of an order. You're go to show up at the temple, and they basically just decided to shut it down without even letting people know. Next thing you know, documents are being burned. And
yeah, well, they also left all their gis. That's what the gis. I'm thinking karate again. They all left their robes there too. Jonathan Collett told me that he was 470. He went away and he come back. The temple had shut. He said they took all my robes and stuff. Oh. He wanted to go back. He was in the OTR. A very clever chap, from what I remember. A young man. He was when Jack put me through the 6.5. He was the guard. He was the person who stood outside when Jonathan came in. He said, "Stand outside." And I get Jonathan to stand outside and tell people not to come in when Jack put me through the 6.5. And I sent an email to him recently. I haven't got one back. Presumably, he's on Facebook. But I got on pretty well with him when I knew him. I never had any problems with him. We weren't angry. I could not see totally his viewpoint and looking at Crowley, but he couldn't see mine either. So that was it. He was very much a Crowley. I think he was head of one of the orders in Auckland. But I found him a reasonable sort of a guy. He had some issues here and there that he had to deal with health-wise, but no problem with him at all from my end anyway.
Well, I think we'll wrap this one up. We've covered a lot now. In terms of how you got in touch with these people, how they taught, a little bit of the perspective on how the system, is lived and expressed. It goes so far beyond just the documents and all those snippets of history.
One quick one. I'll give you an idea of the way things worked. When I was doing work on the Kameas, or Kameas as some people call them, I'm probably going Maori type. I asked Bethany Jones, had anyone else done any work on those, and she put me in touch with another guy by the name of Miller. And he'd worked on these magical squares, and he'd done a bit. I'd worked out a system. I had plenty of help from different people to understand how the things came together and what the alternatives were. So I was well up on it. But I wrote to him to see, I want to know what he did with them, how he applied them magically.
Mm-hmm.
And he said to me, he says, I have never got to that stage where I actually use them functionally. He would put all that work and all those years into it, but never.
Oh.
And I thought, that really surprised me. But that was how some of it worked. So you had intelligent people, extremely. You had people good at ritual. You had intelligent people that were dumb clucks. You had people doing ritual who couldn't find their way to the esoteric bathroom. Then you had people doing ritual who were very, very good. It was a total mixture. They weren't all great. Tony and I were, we knew some of the same people. There was one guy who was he was a bit of a nutcase. He turned up at our doorstep one time. I didn't know him from bar of soap. And he said, I was at Whare Ra. I said, well, what did you get up to? He said, I was a 5'6". I said, well, come in, sit down, talk. He went into the kitchen. And as I sat down, I looked at the top of his head, and I swear to this day, it was as plain as you think. I saw a big hole in the top of his head, and I looked at it, and I said, shit, am I seeing things? I shut my eyes and opened them, and it was still there. And then after about 20 seconds, it vanished. I knew that what he was telling me was sort of weird. Anyway, sometime later, I mentioned to Jack, I said, this guy turned up, his name is so-and-so. Oh, God, don't let him near me. If he knows about me, tell him I'm dead. He was put in a mental hospital for about 6 months or for a year. What happened was that he went through the order. He wanted to get a 5'6". Jack said no, but the other hierophant had come in after him and put him through.
Oh, wow.
And that was it. He went straight there. After the 5'6", he went into the mental health unit. There you can draw your own conclusions whether that caused it, was a causal factor, or whether it was just timing. I really don't know. But he spent time in a mental health unit for a while. And of course, that was a hole that I saw, but I didn't know this man from anything. I saw the hole, I said, ew, something's not right here.
Well, you're saying Jack was quite intuitive and quite clairvoyant, so I mean, that's probably the reason he didn't want to put him through.
Jack was like that. Jack knew he'd go off the deep end. These energies aren't to be played with. I put through Patricia Beeman into the 6'5" in the hope that it would help her, because I'd read a paper that Mrs. Falcon did the same thing, to try and make her understand more, and it would put more pressure on her to be more diligent in her work rather than just be posturing around the place. And it had the opposite effect. As soon as she took that 5'6", she went back. She started to go off the deep end.
The 6'5", you mean?
6'5". Yeah. She started to go off the deep end. See, I'm going off the deep end, telling you. But anyway, that was a way of it. My biggest issue, when I write and type, I have dyslexia, and it's been a real difficult time for me because I miss words and I get words back to the front and I see words that aren't there sometimes. So it's always hard for me to do it. So when I type, I've got it on a roll. I get the energy. I type out. You try doing a PhD, which I've tried to do. Of about 500 words if you have dyslexia.
Oh, believe me, I'm aware. I've done a lot of proofreading for your stuff.
My partner Joe thought I was nuts in the room because you had to come out and had to go back over everything and nail it.
Yeah.
And I didn't realise I had dyslexia. That was the part about it. So when I went through university, late, when I was in my 50s. It was something I wanted to do, so I did it. But when I got to writing the PhD, that was very, very hard. From the correctional
well, even through your correspondence course, which we'll talk about in the next one, there was a lot of proofreading that we had to do in there, and it's all good, but I definitely see
it's great stuff. It's great stuff, but it makes me feel like I'm a 2-year-old, not getting it. But once you realise you have an issue, you got to put your hand up and say, all right, how do I fix it? Well, the idea is go slowly, which I don't intend to do sometimes.
Well, when you get on a roll,
we better wipe this up before we go to the next one.
Yeah. All right. So we'll wrap it up. And this was the one on Whare Ra. As you see, there's some really, really amazing history bits in there. A lot of stuff that you won't find anywhere written. So thanks, Pat. This was a really, really good one. We went an hour and 20 minutes, so we'll close it up. And we'll come back from the next one soon.